listening to The Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are a part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Motherhood Experience podcast. Today's episode is part 2 of Jackie's story. If you did not listen to part 1 last week, I strongly encourage you to go back and listen to it today. We're going to pick up at the cliffhanger where we left off in the last episode. And I just hope that you are touched and blessed to hear her story as I was. Let's get right into part 2 of my conversation with Jacque Martin. Welcome back. We are here for part 2 of my conversation with my friend Jacque. We left it kind of a cliffhanger last week. We're going to follow it up here with the story. Jacque, take us back to the affair you had was kind of out in the open. Your life was kind of in turmoil. Not kind of. Your life was in turmoil.
It was,
the kids were struggling. Take us forward from there. What happened next?
So we actually separated for a bit. And then, I stayed in the house for a while. He moved to a different house, but still taking care of the kids. I ended up getting a different job, became a CNA, and worked at an assisted living. And I did the night shift, so he could watch the kids at night, and then I could be home with them, even though I was sleeping. I'd come home, take the kids to school, wrap up in a warm blanket, try to sleep, and then pick up the kids from school and then go back to work, and occasionally falling asleep at work. But, just dealing with the kids and the kids having questions and stuff. Shelby and I would talk, but she was always tried to be so understanding. She wouldn't really show that she was mad, even though I'm like, I know you are. And it was always like, I'm fine, Mom. She was always so worried about her brothers. And then, you try to block things out, the bad times in your life. So I'm not really sure what made me go back.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly can't remember, except for the fact that maybe I was afraid I could not support my children on my own. So I went back. We moved to, a couple different places renting, and then we finally bought a place, moved in. But it was constant turmoil, constant fighting, constant yelling. It was, just crazy. I left being a CNA and got a job at the hospital as a unit clerk and as an EMT. And I did a lot of working so much, sadly enough, to be away from him, which also made me be away from my children. To a point, I had parents, saying what a bad mother I was because I was never at my children's sports, which they were all so athletic in every sport, and they were constantly at practice or games. And I missed a lot of it because I was like, I just need money. I just need money. And I think there was always just a plan in the back of my head, if I can support myself. We ended up, this relationship was so on and off. And my poor children went through so much, watching this. It was, we're together, we're not together, we're together. And then we separated, but stayed in the same house. He literally moved to the basement while I lived upstairs. And, the kids having to deal with that. But in my mind, I was like, hey, but they still have both their parents in the house. It wasn't until later that it dawned on me why my daughter was constantly, I want to go live with my dad. I want to go live with my dad. And I kept telling her, absolutely not. I'm not going to let your dad have the easy years. I've struggled. And so my daughter, she went through a lot, and, in her own head and within herself, because I wouldn't let her leave. And in turn, I know she was there for her brothers. It was chaos, just total chaos. We finally just got to a point, weirdly enough, we were actually getting along great. And it just dawned on me, it's because we're like best friends, but not a relationship. Like, you stole my joy as far as a marriage. And I asked for a divorce, and it was, of course, it went bad because I was the bad person. And when we separated, you have some parents that are like, I need to be their best friend and buy them whatever they want. And that was him. And then they would come home to me and I would let them know, I am not your best friend. I am your mother. It is my job to put a roof over your head and feed you and clothe you. And that is it. I'm like, we don't bring games to the house. We don't bring PlayStations, and family time is on the couch. We watch TV to a point. I thought I was being so hard on them, but I just wanted to put my foot down and be like, nobody's going to walk on me.
Mm.
And then to have their dad come to pick them up and one day ask me, he's like, how do you do it? And I'm like, what? And he says, whenever I come home, the kids scatter to their rooms and they're on their PlayStations and watching their TVs. He goes, but when I come to get them at your house, you're all on the couch watching TV. And I said, because I told them this is family time. When you're here to see me, you're here to see me. And it was a week on, week off, joint
Mm.
custody. There were times I'm like, children probably hate me because I felt like I was hard on them. For me, I was like, we have to have ground rules. We have to have rules. And it's paid off. It's paid off. And I realized I did do the right thing. So, yeah, it was a lot of, they made it through it. But as soon as my daughter graduated high school, my daughter and I have never fought. And to this day, I think she's the most amazing woman. I look up, she's shorter or down. I look
You're
up to,
very tall and she's pretty short.
like, I look up to my daughter. I think she is the most amazing woman.
Yeah.
And so for her and I to fight, because I went to work, she was supposed to go to her dad's for a couple weeks. You never had to check on her. She was so grown up. 3 days after she was gone, before we had gotten a divorce, her stepdad went downstairs to get something out of her room. And he's like, when you go visit, how much stuff do you take? And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, there is nothing in her room. It is empty. And lo and behold, when I went to work, her dad had came for her graduation party and loaded up everything and took her home with him. That was, relationships, bad relationships, nothing. I don't think I'd ever been so heartbroken in my life as my
Wow.
my daughter leaving without telling me. I called her. Granted, I was heartbroken and I was upset, but I told her, don't ever come back. Don't you ever talk to your brothers. You're not allowed in my home. How dare you do this? It took me a week to calm down and call her crying, telling her how sorry I was and how much I loved her. And then I didn't mean anything I said, that I was just so hurt. And she's like, Mom, because I knew you wouldn't let me go. She's like, I've
Mm.
been asking for years and you wouldn't have let me go. That's one and only time my daughter and I have actually fought. We get along amazing.
Yeah.
But, her brothers, never once did they ask for their dad and I to get back together. And I'm like, that's how bad it was, that they were glad we were no longer together.
Mm.
We struggled as far as, getting along. I struggled as a single mom. I lost my job. I moved out of town and got another job, an amazing job with an amazing doctor. My youngest, who was 11 at the time, did not want to move with me. And all I could think was, I need to be a mom. And I had had this job for 4 months. Yeah, 4 months. And told the doctor, I said, I'm so sorry. You hired me a new position. You bought me a desk. You set me up an office, and I have to leave. He said, I can't be away from my son. He doesn't want to move here. He told me, I will write you a record. Being a mom comes first. And it was great. I left and came back, worked for a carpet cleaning business for the table, so I didn't have to, be gypped on my taxes. um, and just trying to pay for kids' school lunches and trying to work. And my now 26-year-old, so my second oldest, became quite the challenge. An incredibly intelligent person, and even then, an incredibly intelligent child, and failing every class in school. Just, I'm like, who are you? I parented you and your sister. What happened to you? And constant fighting. And it was just an uphill, downhill with him all the time. And I think about it now and I'm like, just probably just trying to find his place in life. And there would be times I'd yell at him and 5 minutes later turn around crying, being like, I'm so sorry I yelled at you for not doing your homework, but you're so smart. His older brothers and sisters, like, Mom, you tell him he can at least get C's in school, and you told us A's and B's. And I'm like, there's a difference. I just want him to pass, and I knew you guys could. I mean, if anything, I honestly think about it and I can't believe I wasn't like on medication, because my life was so full of struggle
Yeah.
that as an adult, I didn't know who I was. I'm running so much and trying to work, and yet trying to find myself and having this midlife crisis, and going out with my friends, and got a side job bartending. And I mean, my children would come have a pop with me at the bar so that they could come see me. Ride their bikes to this bar and have a soda, and I'd fix them a pizza, so that I knew they ate, and then go home and stay by themselves. Oh
But
my God.
I mean, so much struggle endured
Yeah.
for all three of the kids. And it has to be, I'm sure there's some scientific thing where it has to be different. Like you were their only common denominator. All
Yes.
three kids had a different dad, and all three kids had a different upbringing, really. And you were their only, connection. And
Yeah.
so it just had to be weird on probably levels that you and I don't
Don't understand.
understand. But
Yeah. Because in my mind, they're my children. They're all three of my children. We're all family. There's nothing different about them.
yeah,
But for them, it was different.
yeah.
You know?
Well,
Yeah.
and for Tyler also being adopted
Yeah.
and just kind of, having a father but not having
Yeah.
two fathers but not like
Yeah.
so I mean, we'll probably have someone psychoanalyze all of this, who knows, but I do remember as you were talking about when you had bought the place together, and I still remember because I had to, it maybe had been after we moved away, but I came back and visited or something.
Yeah.
And so I remember the place, but after we had moved away, I had this dream,
Uh,
and it was about you and your husband at the time and the kids. And I had gone to this house, which in my dream kind of looked like the house that you were living in at the time, but not exactly. But I remember when I went to see the house, I was like, oh, weird. This is the house that I had the
this
dream
is the
about.
house.
And I walked in and there was a lioness, like, an African lioness in a cage in the middle of y'all's living room. And you were like, look at our lion. And I was looking at you like, you're a freaking moron. You're going to die. This is
Yeah.
dangerous. You have to get out of here. And I remember that I grabbed the kids and put them in a car, which it was a convertible that had the top down, which is funny. Like if you think about, as I explain the dream more, but it was all I could do to convince you to come with me. It was all I could do. And I grabbed you and I was like, I have your kids. You have to come with me. And you just kept looking back and I'm not sure. And finally, at like the last possible minute, because during all of this time, the lion is escaping the cage, just like I said would happen.
Right.
And at the last possible minute, you got in the car with me. We took off driving. Your husband at the time kind of watched us from the door, shut the door. The lion ended up devouring him.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, I'm racing us all around this little town. It was like dirt roads. And then the lion gets out of the house and is chasing the car that's a convertible with the top down. So we were safe, but not like we were totally exposed. And I stopped in this gas station and I was like, I need a gun. The guy at the gas station gives me a gun, which when would that ever happen? Never. And so then I'm driving this convertible. Meanwhile, the four of you are just like, you're just sitting there all nice and along for the ride. And meanwhile, Val's like doing stunt driving and shooting over everybody at this lion. And finally, again, it's like the last possible minute and drive us to safety. And I remember waking up and just being like, what was that all about?
Right.
And I emailed one of the pastors from that church where Shelby had come up to me that Sunday. We had moved away. We were in a different state, but I said, I had this dream. Can you maybe help me make heads or tails of this? And it was a few days later before he emailed me back, and he was like, you're standing in the gap for these kids and their mom, and you need to keep praying for them so that they don't get devoured by this lion. And then it was in 2008, I still remember. And I had this voicemail on my phone while I was at work. And I went and listened to it. And it was Tiffany from episode 2. And she had been at this retreat all weekend. And she said, Val, I just had this rock star team helper, so faithful, just leading everybody and encouraging everybody, such a hard worker, and blah, blah, blah. And at the very end of her message, she said, Val, it was Shelby. And I just remember like completely overcome. I'd been praying for 10 years and I had had the dream 2 years prior. And so it was like, okay, we've got one. And then I can't remember when exactly it was, but I was kind of on again, off again Facebook up until whatever, the 2016. I couldn't hack it anymore. Yeah. But I saw you posting pictures of you reading your Bible and scriptures that meant a lot to you and things. And I was so moved and remember thinking like that I went from thinking we had lost you to now you were the Jacque who he always knew you could be. Anyway, before I fall apart again, you moved, you got settled, you met a guy. Let's pick up from there. And Shelby also met a guy.
Yeah.
And so let's kind of fill in some of those gaps.
Shelby actually met Lou first while I was still living in Cody. And she brought this young man. Actually, the first time I met him is they were coming to pick up Tyler and take Tyler skiing for Christmas, snowboarding, whatever. This young man comes in, and introduces himself. And I'm like, okay, great. For me, I'm like, relationships suck. So I'm not really sure where to go with this guy yet. He's a rancher. And once him and Shelby started dating and stuff, she would go out to the ranch and help out all the time. I mean, she was kind of grown. She was kind of raised her dad wise, in that kind of lifestyle. And she's a hard worker. She's crazy. But he's telling me about this time they were, moving, or they were separating cows. And this cow had hit this fence so hard that part of the fence come up and came down on Shelby and knocked her out. And he was like, all I could think was, I can't lose the best thing I've ever had. And immediately my heart was like, you can stay. You can stay because she is the best thing you will ever have, and I have loved him ever since. They've been married for 9.5 years.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And my son-in-law is absolutely amazing.
He better be. That's all I'm gonna say.
Right. He has a gift in his presence, I'm just saying. In all ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had struggled. I had dated off and on, and of course, just like my previous times, picked really just not good people, or people that were not good for me. And crazy enough, for one of them that lived in another state, this person I was talking to back and forth, I told myself, I'm like, okay, if you want something to work, if you want a relationship to work, you just need to you need to get yourself back on track. What's going to put you there? I was raised in the church. I just separated it from my struggles, and immediately I was like, I have to get myself right with God. But it wasn't for myself, it was for this other person. And so I was looking for books on how to be the perfect wife, how to be the godly wife, how to be all this, because you know that's the only way that any relationship is going to work. And I was looking at books and I'm like, I absolutely hate to read, by the way. So what made me get a book? I was like, what in the world? So I'm looking at all these books and I was like, I'm not a wife. I'm not this. I'm not that. So I was like, okay, well, here's one. And it was The Power of a Praying Woman.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm going to get that book. And then, of course, as you're ordering, it says, oh, here's a study guide with it. And I'm like, I'm going to get that too. By the way, I also hate school. So it was God speaking to me so hard, because only Him would have made me want to buy a book
Yeah.
and a study guide.
Yeah.
I ordered the book, decided to get it, called my sister and told her, and she's like, that is so great, Jackie, and I said, I'll keep you posted. And as I'm reading it, the first chapter was like, oh my gosh, this book is speaking to me. I am on a high. And because I'm like, I'm just going to be the best person for this person I was talking to. And then the second chapter had me in the most darkest place I have ever been. And I'm like, how can this book do this? But, it was pulling things out of me that I need to get rid of. And I even one day I walked into the bathroom after, every morning I would get up faithfully every morning and do this study guide with this book. I would get so excited to read it. But this one chapter, I kept going back to it and continuing to read, even though it like had my heart in a vice grip.
Mm.
And I walked into the bathroom to get ready for work one day, and I looked up and then looked away. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. And I'm like, immediately told myself, I'm like, you have something to do. Went to my room, got on my knees, and started asking God to forgive every person that had ever wronged me. From the time I was young, some very, very drastic things. And I'm like, please forgive them. I was like, just like Jesus said, I'm like, they know not what they do. I'm like, just forgive them, because I do. I forgive them. And it was like my whole world had been taken off my shoulders. And I got up and walked into the bathroom and was just like, I was literally physically looking at a different person. And I went through this book and this whole study guide to the point where I started reading slower, because I was coming to the end of the book. So I wouldn't read as much every day. I'd read just little bits because I didn't want the book to end, because I was determined that book was helping me just feel so good. I had never felt so good. Until it was finished and I realized I'm still feeling good. And I had always asked God, just bring me a man. I don't want to be alone. And I finally sat down in my living room one day and was like, God, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. I have my children, and most of all, I have you. But when you feel it's right, bring me a man that will help me grow in my walk with you, because I want somebody who I can share my life with Christ with. And it was literally like a month later, a guy I had blown off for a year, like, no, I don't want nothing to do with him. He's like, hey, I haven't heard from you for a long time. What's been going on? And I'm like, a lot. I'm like, I've made a lot of good changes in my life. And he's like, I'd love to hear it. And we ended up going for burgers and a beer one night, and we sat and just kind of, chit chatted. And then he's like, so do I get to hear your story? And I was like, well, let's go out on the patio. It's a little too crowded in here. Yeah.
That's
I
so
don't want
Jackie. That's
I don't
so
want
Jackie.
everybody knowing my story. Um, Funny enough, I'm an open book now, but back then not
Yes.
so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we went out on the patio and it was real quiet. It was just the two of us out there. And I began to tell him anything and everything that had happened to me and my entire life from pretty much the time I was born. And by the time I got done, because I wasn't like looking at him as I was telling him, it was just kind of looking down, looking off, and I just kept talking. And by the time I was done, I looked up and this man just had tears running down his face. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? And he's like, I am so sorry that you've ever had to go through any of that. I would do anything to take those things away from you. And I said, why? I'm like, said, I say prayers and thank God for every struggle I've ever had, because everyone was a brick that built me, and like I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be the person I am without getting stronger through those. So we dated for like 3 years, and he's like, I don't like long distance relationships. So 2 months later I moved. Like, I'm so sorry. But he stuck around and he would come see me, and he actually helped me move. And we have now, Christmas Eve, it will be 6 years that we've been married. He's amazing. Funny thing, when we were dating, my youngest was still living with me because Tyler, the middle child, he had also gotten ticked off and moved out, and was just kind of separating himself from me. So I still had my youngest, Jonathan, at home. And this kid, my ex-husband actually called and he says, I just want to say that this person that you are with must be a really good person, because Jonathan can't say enough about him. He's like, and I just want to say I'm happy for you. And I've never had my dad tell me before, we'll be talking on the phone and he's like, well, tell Dave I love, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, and my daughter, my children love him. My child that separated himself, that now we are very close. He, for a while there, he was calling Dave more than he would call me. And I'm just like, yeah, I talked to Tyler today. And I'm like, cool. And how's he doing?
Oh,
So he's amazing. And, he loves God. He's not without his faults, because we struggle with just things in the world. But even I work a lot on Sundays, and he sits in church and he's like, man, I hate sitting here without you. We
yeah.
love to go to church. We love to talk about God. When we talk about our children, I have two amazing stepsons. But when we talk about our children, this man gets teary because his heart is huge. He tells me I would never have wanted to know him before, but I'm just like, well, it doesn't matter because you wouldn't have me. I'm like, God put us
Right.
together at the perfect
The
time.
perfect time.
Yeah.
And and we've got just a few minutes left in our time together. And I really want to hear about baby George and Shelby. And so just kind of brag on them as we
Okay.
wrap up our time.
I do that really well. Um, so, so my amazing daughter, I mean, this child deserves everything in the world. She's been the most supportive person in our entire family. She is a life cheerleader. And I watched her struggle for 6 years trying to have a baby, and seeing specialists, seeing doctors, having labs drawn like crazy, and traveling to different places. And she's like, Mom, but why? Why isn't God letting me have a child? And I'm like, honey, because, well, she would get pregnant and have miscarriages. And they said, the time will come. And I'm like, those beautiful souls, I'm like, they're with Jesus. She struggled and struggled. And 6 years later, I have an almost 9-month-old grandson named George. he's, he's beautiful. I struggled with the name. I struggled with it so bad at first, but he looks like a George and he's beautiful. And She's the most amazing mom, which I knew she would be.
Of course.
They're ranchers. She sent me a picture yesterday of him strapped in a little seat in the cab of the tractor with his dad, just out there doing his thing, and I'm like, it's life is now perfect. My boys, if they have kids, they do. If they don't, they don't. Now, I mean, granted, I want more, but
Yeah.
it was mostly important for her to have that child and feel that kind of love that I have for mine. She deserves it. So he's great. I tell everybody how perfect he is, and I know my boys are like, we're never having children, they'll never match up. So, just like their sister, they're like, she's perfect, we know.
Tyler and Jonathan, if you ever hear this, you stop right now. You have those babies.
Right? Absolutely.
Yes. Well,
life
Jacque,
is great.
I cannot thank you enough for agreeing to come on here and do this with me.
Thank you.
So transparent. And I know because I know like the 3 people in town who listen to my podcast, and they're all named Jessica. But that was a really popular name back in the mid 80s. Thank you. I know this is going to touch so many hearts. I mean, granted, this is the longest podcast interview that I've done, so maybe it goes without saying that is the most times I've cried. We set a record tonight.
Yeah. And I mean, it's minimal compared to what we could have. We did good and laughed it off.
We covered 25 years in like less than an hour. So I'd say we did pretty good. I love you so much, friend, and I'm so grateful that you came on here to share. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I love you. And good luck on all the other interviews.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head on over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow the Motherhood Experience on Facebook and Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.